The afternoon air carried the warmth of late summer, heavy with the scent of fresh tar and the faint sweetness of ice cream cones melting too fast in children's hands. Harper Kane walked steadily down Main Street with a canvas bag slung across her shoulder, the weight of groceries pressing lightly against her side. The leather workshop she had run for 6 years sat 2 blocks behind her. Its front window, dark now that she had locked the door early. It was the kind of shop where customers brought in cracked saddlebags or faded jackets, trusting her hands to restore what time had worn. For Harper, the work was steady, quiet, and ordinary. A life far removed from the Navy years when she had lived on manifests, supply chains, and the rhythm of deployments. She did not think about those years anymore. Not until moments that did not leave room for thought at all. Main Street was alive with its usual chorus. The bell above the diner door chimed as customers went in and out, and the low murmur of conversation spilled onto the sidewalk. Chrome gleamed from motorcycles lined along the curb, their owners laughing loud enough to be heard across the street. Harper noticed them in passing, but did not linger. She adjusted her grip on the bag and looked ahead, ready to head home to the comfort of a quiet evening. Then the light caught her eye. It was not the reflection of sun on a polished bike or the glint from a diner window. This light was harder, colder, an unnatural spark that came from metal raised at the wrong angle. Harper's gaze sharpened in an instant, following the glimmer between 2 parked cars. A figure stood half-hidden, posture taut, arm extended. In the arc of sunlight, the truth was unmistakable. A handgun leveled across the street. Her eyes traced its aim. Duke Rock, president of the local Hells Angels chapter, stood with a coffee cup in one hand, laughing with 2 of his men outside the diner. He had the kind of presence that drew attention without effort. Broad-shouldered, silver threading through his beard, his voice carrying easily over the street. He was facing his men, unaware, framed perfectly in the crosshairs of someone waiting in the shadows. Harper did not freeze. Years of muscle memory returned in a heartbeat, reflexes honed on training grounds and deployment corridors. The bag shifted against her hip as she lunged forward in 3 hard strides. Her hand struck Duke square in the chest, shoving him sideways with enough force to break his balance. She twisted her own body at the same moment, turning into the path of danger rather than away from it. The shot cracked the air, sharp enough to rattle glass in nearby windows. The sound fractured the ordinary afternoon like a hammer against porcelain. Pain tore through her shoulder with brutal clarity, spinning her halfway around. She gritted her teeth, refusing to collapse. Breath caught sharp but steady. The coffee cup Duke had held slipped from his grasp, shattering against the pavement. Liquid, spreading dark across the sunlit concrete. For one suspended moment, the entire street went silent. The clatter of dishes from the diner stopped. The laughter evaporated. All that remained was the faint metallic ring of a bullet casing striking the sidewalk near Harper's boots. Time seemed to hold its breath as Duke stared at her, disbelief etched across his face. His broad frame braced against the wall he had been shoved into. The shooter was already gone. Retreating into the web of alleys that laced behind Main Street, the shadows swallowed him quickly, leaving no trace but the echo of footsteps fading into distance. Harper pressed her palm to the heat spreading across her shoulder, the grocery bag still hanging from her other arm, its weight absurdly unchanged. That small detail rattled Duke more than the blood on her sleeve. She had not dropped it. She had not broken her grip, even as the bullet struck. The stillness held for another beat. The town locked in awe and shock. Diners pressed against the glass, wide-eyed. Duke's men recovered first, boots pounding as one ran toward the alley and the other dropped beside Harper, hands reaching to steady her. The sound of a coffee cup rolling to a stop seemed louder than the murmurs rising in the background. Harper forced herself to remain upright, her breath measured, her voice steady when she muttered that she was fine. Her composure in that moment unsettled everyone who saw her. She did not look like a victim. She looked like someone who had done what needed doing and would not ask for recognition. In that frozen silence, a truth settled unspoken across Main Street. A woman who had wanted nothing more than quiet days repairing leather had stepped into the line of fire without hesitation. Heroism had not been planned or announced. It had been instinct, pure and uncompromising. And in the world that had just witnessed it, a debt had been written in blood. The hospital lights were too bright, glaring white across every surface, making even the smallest shadow feel foreign. Harper Kane sat on the edge of a narrow bed, her shoulder wrapped in a clean bandage. The sling already fitted with clinical efficiency. The smell of antiseptic clung to the air, sharp and unyielding. Cutting through the faint hint of burnt coffee drifting from the nurse's station, doctors had moved around her with clipped voices, reciting notes and confirming that the bullet had gone straight through. Painful. Yes. Dangerous. No. Harper had listened with the same patience she carried into every task, answering only when necessary. Her calm almost unnerving to those who expected panic. She knew pain, knew how to fold it into routine. This was nothing compared to the weight of rucksacks over foreign sand or the ache in her arms after days of lifting loads that outlasted men twice her size. She did not flinch as the nurse tightened the sling. She did not complain when told to rest. To Harper, it was just another obstacle to manage. The real challenge was the silence pressing around her, not the wound. When the door swung open, the atmosphere shifted. Duke Rock filled the space without needing to raise his voice. His leather vest carried the scent of smoke and asphalt, his heavy boots echoing against the sterile tile. He looked out of place beneath fluorescent lights. A man carved for open roads and dim bars, not antiseptic corridors. Yet he moved as if the space belonged to him now. His eyes fixed on Harper with a weight that made the nurse excuse herself quickly, retreating into the hallway. "You shouldn't be sitting up," Duke said. His tone wasn't harsh, but firm, carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "I'm not the bed rest type," Harper answered, her voice even. "I'm fine." The bullet missed anything important. Duke's gaze narrowed. He didn't argue about the injury. What he wanted was the truth behind what he had seen on the street. "You didn't hesitate, he said slowly. "Most people freeze. You didn't." Harper shifted her eyes to a scuffed patch of linoleum on the floor. Unwilling to meet his stare. "Old habits," she muttered. He stepped closer, the sound of his boots deliberate. What kind of habits shove a man out of the way and take a bullet in his place? The room seemed smaller now. The buzz of fluorescent bulbs suddenly loud. Harper exhaled, letting the silence stretch before she answered. "Navy. 12 years. Logistics and field operations." The words were plain, but the weight in them was enough to change the air between them. Duke leaned back slightly, assessing her as if fitting a new piece into a puzzle. "Explains the reflex," he said. His mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but not disdain either. "Explains why you didn't scream when you got hit." Harper glanced toward the bedside table where a sealed discharge envelope rested. The hospital's instructions neat and impersonal. Her life had been built around leaving those years behind, building something quieter with leather, needles, and thread. But with one shove, one split-second decision, the past had surfaced, refusing to stay buried. Duke's presence was raw power against the sterile stillness. He slid his hands into the pockets of his vest, eyes never leaving hers. "You didn't have to do it," he said, voice low but steady. "But you did, and that means something." She wanted to dismiss it, to insist that anyone would have moved. That instinct had been nothing more than timing, but the way he said it left no room for argument. He wasn't talking about chance. He was talking about belonging, whether she wanted it or not. When she stood, the sling pulled tight against her shoulder, reminding her of weight she thought she had left behind. Duke stepped aside, letting her pass. But his words followed her like a brand. Too late for that. You're part of this now. Harper paused just long enough to register the truth in his tone. Her life had been small, deliberate, quiet, but with one act, she had crossed into a world bound by debts and loyalties she hadn't chosen. The past had surfaced, and the town would never see her the same way again. The garage smelled of oil, gasoline, and sweat. The kind of scent that clung to the walls as permanently as the stains etched into the concrete floor. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, buzzing faintly, throwing harsh light across the scarred wooden table that sat in the middle of the room. Duke Rock stood at its head, shoulders square, leather vest open over a faded black shirt. His presence carried weight without him needing to raise his voice. Around him, men filled the space in silence, their faces hard, their colors unmistakable. The air thrummed with tension, thick and electric, as if the garage itself knew what was about to unfold. Razor, Duke's oldest lieutenant, stepped forward with a folder tucked under his arm. Without a word, he pulled a photograph free and tossed it onto the table. The grainy image showed a narrow face with sharp eyes under a ball cap. Kyle Mercer. Low-level muscle for the Black Vultures. The moment the photo landed, a ripple of low mutters passed through the room. Everyone there knew the name. Everyone knew the kind of reckless stupidity it took to aim at Duke in broad daylight. He knew the alleys. Razor said, voice clipped. Slipped before we could close the net. Word is he's holed up in the South End. Chop shop on Oak Ridge. Family ties. His hand tapped the edge of the photo once, sharp enough to echo against the scarred wood. The men leaned in closer, eyes narrowing, postures stiffening. Duke scanned their faces, reading each one without expression. Then he laid both palms on the table and spoke with the kind of calm that settled deeper than anger. Someone took a shot at me today, but they didn't hit me. They hit her. A woman who had no part in this. A woman who stepped in when none of us saw it coming. That debt doesn't get left unpaid. The silence that followed was thick, absolute. Outside, the faint growl of engines vibrated through the walls. More riders pulling in from nearby chapters. The sound built like distant thunder, steady and unstoppable. Duke pointed at the grease pencil maps spread across the table. Streets and alleys marked in sharp lines. Escape routes crossed out. Approach vectors drawn with care. We're not going in blind. 2 squads seal the southern streets. Another sweeps the back alleys. My crew takes the front. His voice stayed low, but each word cut through the air like a command carved in steel. No civilians. No chaos. Clean. Fast. Done. Around him, heads nodded in unison. Some adjusted their jackets. Others checked the gear at their belts. Radios were passed hand to hand, clipped to vests with practiced ease. Earpieces slid into place. A broken padlock hung from the gear cabinet in the corner, evidence of how quickly it had been forced open earlier. Inside, flashlights and radios sat in neat rows. Tools chosen not for brutality, but for control. One rider cracked his knuckles and muttered about payback. But Duke shut him down with a look. This wasn't about rage. This was about message and precision. Razor folded his arms, his grin humorless. They'll get the point. They better, Duke replied. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. His certainty carried more weight than any threat. Outside, the roar of engines grew louder. Headlights cut through the open bay doors, chrome flashing under the dim light. One by one, riders arrived and dismounted, their boots hitting concrete in steady rhythm. They moved with the precision of men who had done this before. Each step part of an unspoken drill. Jackets sipped, helmets strapped, formation waiting to ignite. Inside, Duke lit a cigarette, the smoke curling in the fluorescent glow. He took one drag, then dropped it to the floor and crushed it under his boot. The gesture was quiet, final, a signal more powerful than any shouted order. In that moment, the garage was silent. No laughter, no chatter, just the faint hum of lights and the distant thunder outside. A collective heartbeat waiting to be unleashed. Vengeance here was not chaos. It was order, sharpened into inevitability. When the engines rolled, the town would understand. Harper Kane closed the apartment door behind her with the soft click of a lock sliding into place. The hospital's fluorescent brightness and antiseptic smell still clung faintly to her senses. A sterile aftertaste she could not quite shake. She let out a slow breath, dropping her keys on the counter and moving toward the small kitchen where her tea mug sat abandoned from that morning. The liquid inside had gone cold. A thin film tracing the surface. She picked it up, rinsed it mechanically, and set it back on the table. The silence in the room pressed against her, heavy and familiar. But beneath it, she felt a restlessness she couldn't name. Her phone buzzed twice in quick succession. Old Navy friends. Word already traveling farther than she liked. Each message asked if she was all right. If the rumor of her being shot was true, she tapped out short answers. Nothing elaborate. Just enough to keep them from worrying. She placed the phone face down and leaned her good arm against the table, letting the sling tug at her shoulder until it reminded her to sit straighter. The bullet had torn through, missing anything vital. But the ache carried the weight of more than injury. It carried the knowledge of a moment that had rewritten her place in this town. At first, the sound reached her like a whisper. A low vibration beneath the quiet. She frowned, thinking it might be trucks out on the highway. But the hum thickened, deepened, and grew louder. The glass in her window began to tremble. She stepped closer, hand brushing against the denim jacket draped over a chair. She slipped it on carefully, the fabric tugging against the bandage beneath. The jacket felt like armor, even if only in appearance. When she stepped onto the balcony, the night greeted her with air that was cooler, sharp with the faint tang of exhaust drifting from somewhere far off. The railing shivered beneath her hand as the sound rolled closer. No longer a distant hum, but a gathering storm. Her eyes adjusted to the glow of headlights rounding the curve at the end of Main Street. They came in pairs at first, chrome glinting in the scattered light of street lamps. Then in a column that seemed to stretch endlessly, Harley after Harley. Leather jackets catching the beams, boots steady on pavement. The roar of engines woven into a single of lashend. Unbroken force. The sight was not a parade and not a spectacle. It was a tide moving with purpose. Each rider bound to the one beside him. The formation tight as if drawn with a ruler. Across the street, neighbors had stepped out of their doorways. Arms crossed. Conversations hushed. Some filmed with shaky hands, but most simply stood and watched. Expressions tight with awe and unease. Children peered around their parents' legs, eyes wide at the thunder rolling past. The town that had once felt small and predictable now trembled beneath the passage of something larger than itself. Harper stood still on the balcony, her bandaged shoulder aching under the jacket, her grip tightening on the railing. The vibration of the engines thrummed through the metal, into her hand, up her arm, and into her chest. The world she had spent years avoiding was no longer a distant memory. It was here, below her. Moving like a current that left no room for retreat, the engines grew louder, filling every gap of silence, pressing into every alley, every window pane. The convoy was not for show. It was a reckoning. Harper watched the endless tide roll down Main Street and understood with absolute clarity that one act, one shove, one instant on a sunlit afternoon had pulled her into a storm that would not let her go. The south end of town was never welcoming after dark. Buildings leaned too close to one another, their windows barred or broken, paint long since faded to gray. Sodium lamps buzzed faintly on crooked poles, casting pools of orange light that flickered in and out like dying embers. The smell of rust and old oil clung to the air, On this night, the streets carried more than decay. They carried the thunder of engines rolling in tight formation, each Harley moving as if connected to the next by invisible lines of command. Duke Rock rode at the front, posture steady, eyes fixed on the road. To his right, Razor scanned each alley, his jaw set like stone. Behind them, rows of riders fanned out in twos, headlights aligned, chrome catching the dim light and sharp flashes. The sound was not wild or reckless. It was controlled, measured, deliberate. Every throttle twist seemed to land in unison, the noise echoing against the shuttered storefronts until it felt like the ground itself carried the rhythm. Locals stepped out onto porches, drawn by the commotion but hesitant to move closer. Some whispered to each other, voices carrying just enough to be heard before they fell into uneasy silence. One man leaned on a cane at the corner of a liquor store and muttered that this wasn't a ride. It was a march. A woman clutching her child shook her head, her eyes wide. A dog barked once, sharp and startled, then whimpered back into quiet. At each intersection, two riders broke from the formation, engines snarling just long enough to block side traffic. They sat poised until the column had passed, then folded back into position without a word. The movement was fluid, practiced, like a drill rehearsed countless times. It wasn't speed that unsettled the onlookers. It was the precision. Every shift, every pause, every glance spoke of order. As they pushed deeper into the south end, the streets grew narrower, the air heavier. Barbed wire looped above chain-link fences, glinting under the weak glow of lamps. Abandoned laundromats and boarded-up pawn shops passed in silence, their facades scarred with graffiti and time. The convoy slowed, the roar of engines dropping into a low idle that pulsed through the night like a warning heartbeat. Duke raised his left hand, 2 fingers extended, and the formation held. 120 engines rumbled in place, the sound so dense it vibrated the glass in nearby windows. The road ahead opened into a lot enclosed by chain-link fence. At its center stood the chop shop, a corrugated metal building streaked with rust, its rolling door half shut. The padlock on the gate dangled broken, swaying gently in the breeze. Each faint clink of metal against metal cut through the engine noise like a cold reminder of what lay inside. Riders dismounted in unison, boots striking asphalt with the cadence of soldiers. Jackets shifted as men pulled grease pencil maps from pockets, confirming sectors, tucking them back just as quickly. Flashlights snapped on, their beams cutting across the cracked pavement in sharp angles. No one spoke louder than a murmur. The silence pressed heavier than the roar had, thick and undeniable, every sound amplified by stillness. From the shadows of porches and cracked doorways, townsfolk continued to watch. Fear clung to their faces not because of chaos, but because of how little chaos there was. The angels weren't storming blindly. They moved with calculation, a choreography that spoke of inevitability. The funnel of streets had closed, narrowing with each block, and everyone knew it. The prey was cornered. Duke stepped forward, his boots crunching against gravel, his gaze locked on the dark opening of the chop shop. He didn't need to shout. His men moved as one, filling the perimeter, engines still idling low behind them. The broken padlock swung once more and fell still, the faint sound vanishing into the hum. Fear did not come from the noise, it came from the silence, from the certainty that what was about to happen had already been decided. The chop shop lot was swallowed by shadows, broken only by the harsh orange glow of a single overhead lamp hanging from a bent pole. Its light fell in a tight circle across the cracked asphalt, bright enough to cut faces into sharp lines and leave everything beyond in darkness. The half-shut rolling door of the building rattled once before a pair of bikers yanked it wide. Inside, the stench of grease and metal bled into the night, and within seconds, Kyle Mercer was dragged out, his boots scraping against the ground. At first, his shoulders were set with defiance, His mouth curved into a smirk meant to mask the shake in his hands. He squinted against the lamp, as if it were an interrogation light, his eyes darting to the rows of riders forming a half-circle around him. 120 men stood in silence, their presence heavier than any sound. Chrome caught in the glow. Leather shifted, but no one spoke. The stillness pressed down harder than the engines ever had. Duke Rock stepped forward, his shadow stretching long across the pavement, almost reaching Mercer before he did. His expression was calm, set, eyes sharp. He didn't need to raise his voice. The weight in the air made every word inevitable. "You aimed for me," he said, his tone flat but heavy. "But you hit her?" Mercer tried to scoff, rolling one shoulder as if brushing off the accusation. "She shouldn't have been there," he muttered. The smirk on his face faltered when no one moved. When no laughter followed, the silence was complete. Judgment without a word. Duke's gaze never wavered. She was there because she saw what you didn't, because she had the courage to move when you didn't have the guts to come face to face. His words landed with precision, each one measured, each one cutting deeper than a shout could have. From the edge of the lot came the low growl of a single engine. Every head turned as another bike pulled in, its rider small against the saddle but steady in posture. The engine cut off, and Harper Kane swung hair leg over. The denim jacket she wore, hiding the bandage tight across her shoulder. She walked through the gate without hesitation, boots clicking softly against the gravel. The lamp's glow caught her face as she stepped into the circle, her expression calm, her eyes steady. Mercer's bravado cracked as his gaze flicked from Duke to Harper. "So this is her," he said, forcing the words out with a hollow kind of bravado. "The hero?" Harper didn't blink. She stopped a few feet from him, her voice level, sharp enough to cut through the silence. "You're not worth that word." The smirk drained completely from Mercer's face. His mouth opened, but no words followed. Harper took another step closer, close enough now that the collar of her jacket shifted slightly, revealing the edge of the bandage beneath. She didn't raise her voice, but the words carried, sharper than steel. "You missed what you aimed for. Don't make the same mistake twice." The silence that followed was heavier than the shot that had torn the afternoon apart. Mercer swallowed hard, his earlier swagger dissolving under the weight of every eye locked on him. The lamp above swung slightly in the breeze, its light casting him like a man pinned under a spotlight. No place left to run, no place left to hide. Duke stood steady, his hands relaxed at his sides. Then, without a word, he gave the smallest nod toward Razor. It was all it took. Two men stepped forward and seized Mercer by the arms, their grip unshakable. He struggled once, then stopped when he realized the futility. His protests were drowned not by noise but by silence, the kind that spoke of absolute control. No blood was spilled, no blow was struck. The message had already been delivered in the act of restraint. Duke's men held Mercer firm, waiting for what came next. But everyone knew the decision had been made in that single nod. Harper exhaled slowly, her hand tightening once against the denim jacket, the fabric rough beneath her fingers. She had not planned to be here, but the moment had demanded it, and she had answered. Around here, 120 men remained motionless. The silence, their verdict. The lamp, their witness. True power was not in the violence withheld, but in the certainty of what had been shown. Mercer would leave this place carrying a weight heavier than bruises. He would carry the knowledge that he had been spared, not forgiven. The night air was thick with the vibration of engines, the sound carrying through every alley and over every rooftop as the convoy rolled forward. 120 Harleys, moved as a single body, their headlights cutting clean lines of white across the dark streets. At the front, Duke Rock rode steady, his presence a pillar around which the formation formed. Just behind, Kyle Mercer was wedged between two riders, trapped by walls of leather and steel, his head low, his silence louder than protest. Harper Kane rode near the front, the borrowed bike steady beneath her hands. The handlebars shook with the rhythm of the pack, the vibrations sinking into her bones, until it felt less like she was riding with them, and more like she was part of the machine itself. The denim jacket tugged against her bandaged shoulder, but she hardly noticed. What she felt most was the strange quiet in her chest. Not calm, not relief, but something closer to belonging. For the first time in years, she was part of a current too strong to step away from. Storefront glass reflected their passage, streaks of light stretching across windows like fire trailing in the dark. Shadows from chrome and leather spilled long and jagged against the pavement, flickering with every turn of a wheel. People gathered on sidewalks, pulled from diners and bars by the sound. Some lifted phones to record, their screens glowing pale against their faces. Others simply stood, arms crossed, eyes wide, letting the roar wash over them. None spoke, none interrupted. The convoy was its own law, and the town yielded instinctively. A sedan crept forward from a side street, its driver glancing both ways before realizing what approached. The car froze at the edge of the intersection, headlights dim against the tide of Harleys. Two riders peeled off briefly, engines revving as they blocked the lane. The driver slumped back, hands raised in apology, waiting until the last taillight passed before moving again. The choreography was perfect, not aggressive, just absolute. As the column crossed the river, the bridge shuddered faintly under their combined weight. Tail lights shimmered red across the black water, rippling with the current, reflections stretching long and uneven before breaking into fragments. Harper's eyes lingered on it, the image etched into memory as if it carried permanence. The bridge was more than a crossing. It was a marker, a line drawn between the town they left behind and the message they carried forward. Farther down, teenagers had abandoned a late-night basketball game. The ball rolled forgotten across cracked asphalt while they stood in a row, watching with expressions of awe. One whispered something too soft to carry, but the reverence in his tone was unmistakable. For them, this was legend made real, the kind of story that would outlast the night. Harper's grip tightened on the handlebars. She could feel the loyalty in the engines around her. Not spoken, not shouted, but pounding steady as a heartbeat. Duke never looked back. Never needed to. The formation followed because that was what loyalty demanded. Mercer sat hunched in the middle, the glow of the lamp overhead, painting his face in fleeting glimpses. He was not being paraded in triumph. He was being carried as a reminder. The convoy stretched on, headlights carving the road ahead, tail lights fading into the horizon behind. It was not vengeance that filled the night, but something deeper, heavier, undeniable. This was loyalty in motion, louder than fear, stronger than law, a presence that would linger in the memory of everyone who witnessed it. Sometimes, loyalty did not need to be explained. Sometimes it only needed to move. And when it did, it became unforgettable. The apartment door closed behind Harper Kane with a muted click, and for the first time that night, the silence hit her full force. The roar of 100 engines still lingered in her bones, but the absence of sound now was almost jarring. She leaned her shoulder gently against the wall, the denim jacket tugging against the bandage beneath, and let her breath steady. On the kitchen table, the tea mug she had rinsed earlier sat untouched once again. The quiet domestic object out of place after everything that had unfolded. Her phone buzzed softly on the counter. She picked it up and read the message glowing on the screen. The words were simple, stripped of detail. If anyone asks, you didn't see us tonight. Rest up. No name, no signature, just a number she didn't recognize but understood immediately. She saved it without replying, sliding the phone face down beside the mug. The message was not a request. It was a promise of distance. A reminder that some debts were already settled in ways that didn't belong to paper trails. When she stepped onto the balcony, the night had already begun to thin into early morning. The street below was empty, still carrying the faint smell of exhaust that clung to the asphalt like memory. The railing vibrated slightly under her hand, though she knew it was only her own body recalling the rhythm of the engines. The town was asleep, but not untouched. Somewhere in the quiet, whispers had already started moving from one mouth to another. By mid-morning, those whispers had swelled into stories. In the corner store, the owner, who usually barely looked up from his crossword, met her eyes and gave a short nod. He didn't mention the night directly, but his gaze lingered in a way that told her he knew. On Main Street, people slowed when she passed, conversations dipping for just a beat before resuming with hushed tones. No one asked her for details. They didn't need them. The silence spoke louder. Online, the story twisted into shapes she barely recognized. Someone claimed there had been 200 bikes. Another swore Duke himself had stopped at the courthouse in the middle of the ride. None of the accounts matched, but all of them circled back to her name, Harper Kane. The woman who stepped in front of a bullet. Some called her reckless. Others called her fearless. She read none of it firsthand, but snippets reached her through neighbors and overheard talk. She let it wash past her without correction. The truth wasn't in the details. It was in the impression left behind. That evening, she returned to the balcony. The sun dipped low, painting the street in long shadows and streaks of gold. She rested her good arm against the railing and looked out across the quiet block. For years, she had kept herself apart. Her life narrowed to leather repairs and small-town routine. Now, with no plan of her own, she had been folded into a story bigger than her, one that would be told in gas stations and diners long after the bruise on her shoulder faded. She touched the phone in her pocket, the saved number resting like a hidden anchor. She didn't know if she would ever call it, didn't know if she needed to. What mattered was the certainty it represented. When you stood for someone, the right people stood for you, louder than you could ever expect. In the stillness of that balcony, the legacy wasn't loud or formal. It was in the quiet nods, the softened voices, the whispers that turned an ordinary woman into something remembered. Real legacy was not written in official accounts. It lived in the retelling, in the respect carried without ceremony. Harper had not chosen it, but it was hers now, stitched into the fabric of the town as surely as any patch sewn by her own hands.